Right, let's get into the news portion. The US Ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, has suggested that the United States should pull thousands of troops out of Germany if Germany does not increase its required NATO defence spending. He said it's actually offensive to assume that the US taxpayer must continue to pay to have 50,000 plus Americans in Germany. 50,000. But the Germans get to spend their surplus on domestic programmes. Grenell told the German press agency this week, which the US Embassy later tweeted, it is estimated there are 34,000 American service members stationed in Germany across more than 3 dozen Army and Air Force bases, as well as 17,000 American civilian support staff. Grenell took to Twitter to criticise Germany's lack of spending on defence. So here's another example, is it not, that we've mentioned several times in this show, of the American people putting themselves at risk and paying for the benefit of other countries. Why have we got 51,000 American people stationed as defence in Germany? These are the type of the questions that needs to be addressed. You know, we're already funding NATO, which we're still waiting for Trump to pull out of altogether. It's a Rothschild's army. 51,000 American people. Of course, can be roughly said 35 to 40,000 families who are affected by our people looking after Germans. And we pay for it. And Ohio man was charged with making threats against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, authorities said this week, after he wrote on Facebook the New York Democrat should be shot. Timothy James Ireland was indicted in Toledo, accused of making interstate threats in addition to separate counts of being a felon and fugitive in possession of a firearm, according to the US Attorney Office in Ohio. Now, officials say a concerned citizen reached out to the US Capitol Police on July the 23rd to warn of the threatening Facebook post, which they later confirmed was written by Ireland. He said she should be shot. Can't fire me. My employer would load the gun for me, Ireland wrote, according to the police. And the statement was apparently posted to Facebook along with a news story about the Congresswoman. This is why you have to be careful. People have to be careful. I know sometimes things like that can be said in a joke, but this is the world we live in. We, the people, will get pulled up, and yet I could probably go and check and cite several items where politicians themselves had said something similar against the president, and yet nothing happens. Pelosi was involved in a plot to blow the Capitol building up. Why hasn't she been brought in yet? Like I said, I'm not condoning what he said, but it could have been said as an off-the-wall comment that could be quite easily investigated and realised he's not a threat, and a warning. You don't need mass police turning up. But there's quite a conflict here, is there not? You can go on any clown portal people channel and you'll find similar threats issued against the president on a daily basis, and yet nothing happens. Why isn't the US Capitol Police going about that? 5 people were killed and 3 injured following a rocket explosion on a naval test range base in Russia last Thursday, and state nuclear company Rosatom said that the accident occurred during tests on a liquid propellant rocket engine. Now, 3 injured staff members suffered serious burns in the accident, and authorities had previously said that 2 had died and 6 were injured in the blast at Neon Oxa. I said that right. The company told Russian media that its engineer and technical team had been working on the isotope power source for the propulsion system. The Neon Oxa site carried out tests for virtually every missile system used by the Russian Navy, including sea-launched intercontinental ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and also anti-aircraft missiles. And authorities 29 miles east of Neonska said that radiation levels shortly after the blast were higher than normal for around 40 minutes, but returned to normal afterwards. Amazon again has pledged to investigate allegations that hundreds of teenagers are working illegal hours at a Chinese factory producing its Echo devices. And a new report by China Labour Watch claims that more than 1,500 interns were manufacturing the smart assistants, spying objects is the correct term, at a factory run by supplier Foxconn. And the teenagers aged between 16 and 18 were reportedly pressured into working 60 hours plus a week and also night shifts. Now, Foxconn predictably pointed fingers elsewhere and blamed local managers and vowed to improve monitoring of staff. Now, the company, which makes products for a number of technological giants, has alleged that they have now fired 2 senior staff members at the site in Hengyang, and this is the latest in a string of controversies surrounding working conditions at that particular manufacturer, which is headquartered in Taiwan. Now, back in 2017, it emerged some students were working illegal overtime at another Foxconn facility making Apple iPhone 10s. You know, it's like what I mentioned last week. You know, you can buy a smartphone for $60, Samsung's like, and right next to it is another one for $1,079, being done by children. That's something we can change. We're not buying the higher priced phones. If we don't buy them, they can't sell them, and then they'll have to give us a phone that's more suitable. That's the change we can make. On the streets of Srinagar, Kashmir's biggest city, security officers tied black bandanas over their faces, grabbed their guns and took positions behind checkpoints. People glanced out of the windows of the homes afraid to step out. Many were cutting back on meals and getting hungry in what has now turned into a bit of a war zone between Pakistan and India. And some of the city has now been placed in lockdown, and also the wider region as of last Saturday, which was a day after a huge protest erupted into clashes between Kashmiris and Indian security forces. Shops were shut, ATMs had run dry. I don't think that's the same reason, but and just about all the lines to the outside world, internet, mobile phone and even landlines remained severed, rendering millions of people out of touch. Again, I don't think that's particularly linked. I think there's other details to that. And people who did venture out said they had to beg officers to cross a landscape of sandbags, battered trucks and soldiers staring at them through metal face masks. Several residents said they'd been beaten up by the security forces for simply trying to buy necessities like milk and bread. And India's swift and unilateral decision on Monday to wipe out Kashmir's autonomy significantly raised tensions with its arch-rivals Pakistan, which also claims part of Kashmir, but it's not the only one, because China claims part of it as well. I'll mention why shortly. Now, the territory line between the two nuclear-armed nations was already one of Asia's most dangerous and militarized flashpoints, which has smouldered for decades. Anything dramatic or provocative that happens here, and India's move was widely seen as both troublesome and caused much anxiety across the whole region. Now, Friday afternoon, witnesses said tens of thousands of peaceful demonstrators were moving through the streets of Srinagar, chanting freedom slogans and waving Kashmiri flags, when Indian forces decided to open fire on them. Now, the huge crowd panicked and scattered, and sustained bursts of automatic weapon fire could be heard in some of the videos filmed during the protests, and at least 7 people were wounded, according to hospital officials. Kashmir has long been an issue. To the public, it will be because of the poppy fields that are in between, which is of interest to the black budget groups and the agencies, as we well know. But it's also an underground base for off-world. It always has been. The clue is in the Led Zeppelin song Kashmir. We are both a traveller of time and space. Now, I know, from what I understand, there was a reptilian base, one of the group of reptiles, not the Draco, that was in that region. And so they keep that zone free so they can move about. But there's at the bottom of one of the mountains, there is a double gates that's manned by Chinese military. Not India or Pakistan, Chinese. And they block entry and call it a military zone, but it's not a military base. So there's a lot of rural people who live in that area, the farmland and whatnot, and they have stated that at certain times they've seen craft going in and out day and night, where whole sides of mountains move and the crafts go in and the crafts go out. So that's kind of what's going on in Kashmir. I suggest there's a lot more going on than India and Pakistan fighting, because I think that's a ruse. Hong Kong police are also in trouble and have been found out. And it's something that we've said in this show quite a few times. This time they've been caught. But the Hong Kong police have admitted deploying officers disguised as anti-government protesters during mass unrest that rocked the city last Sunday. Some officers disguised themselves as different characters, the spokesman said, adding that the decoy operation had targeted, quote, extreme violent rioters, unquote. Now, this comes after a video surfaced showing suspected undercover officers making arrests during Sunday's clashes, and protesters have now called for an inquiry into the actions of the police. Now, Hong Kong's mass demonstrations and unrest show no sign of abating more than 2 months after they were sparked by a controversial extradition bill that has since been suspended. And on Monday, protesters occupied Hong Kong's international airport forcing the cancellation of flights. I'm glad they've learned off the French. That's what the French do. Or they get trucks to drive alongside each other on the interstate, or the motorway they call it over there, and just drive at 2 miles an hour. You block traffic, you cause a lot of trouble and a lot of delays, and it does have a financial impact of people doing business within the city. That's how you shut them down, cut off their supply. But the authorities say flights are now resuming. So here we go. Finally, we have at least one police force admits that they use this as a tactic. But don't believe the BS that comes out of their mouth, that they're targeting violent protesters. The reality is, as seen on several other videos in France and America, they are the ones that are the violent protesters. They're put in there to stir things up. Then a mass riot ensues, looting and all kinds of other stuff. And then it's put on the Portal People News to then turn public opinion against the protesters. That's what they do. Well, if you're involved in a protest and someone's acting in a violent way, shut them down or push them out of the protest altogether. Hand them over to the police. That'll be funny. An undercover officer being handed over to their own people. That's how you deal with them. No violence, please. Israel said on Thursday that it will bar 2 Democratic congresswomen from entering the country ahead of its planned visit of their support for the Palestinian-led boycott movement. A decision announced shortly after President Donald Trump tweeted that it would show great weakness to allow them in. The move to bar Republicans Rashida Tlaib of Michigan and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota from visiting the close American ally appeared to be unprecedented and marked a deep foray by Israel into America's bitterly polarised politics, like they've never been involved before. And it's also a sharp escalation of Israel's campaign against the international boycott movement. Now, the Interior Minister Aryeh Deri issued a statement saying that after consultations with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials, he decided to not allow Tlaib and Omar to enter because of their boycott activities against Israel. Oh my. Does that not open a whole can of worms? And they talk about Russian collusion? Is that not Israeli collusion? Where's the media outcry over that? Now, if only we had a 2.5 year, $32 million investigation into Israel collusion, then we might actually get somewhere. Dear me. Sub-Intel. This is indicative hints and also an update on previous things we've put out. But 2 areas that I was made aware of. Nearly 1 million people have been affected by a major power cut across large areas of England and Wales, affecting homes and transport networks. And the National Grid said it was caused by issues with 2 power generators, but the problem is now resolved. Now, there was blackouts reported across the Midlands, the South East, South West and North East of England, and also Wales. Also, there was hundreds of people stranded at King's Cross station as trains were delayed and also cancelled, and traffic lights in some areas also stopped working. What did we say a couple of weeks ago? Also, Freeport, Brunswick, Maine area, Businesses lost all power, computer service, everything for several days, and it only went back up and running on Monday morning. I have heard of other ones, but I didn't have time to get them ready for this show. Tumblr, the blogging site that has been a hub for the internet's what it describes in the article, most weird, wonderful and occasionally worrisome content, is getting another new home. Remember I was talking about the mergers? Now, Verizon said on Monday it has agreed to sell Tumblr to the company Automattic, the parent company of WordPress.com. See how they're all connected? And not surprisingly, the terms of the deal were not disclosed, probably because it was laundered money like the Monsanto-Bayer deal. Or there is no money, that's why. Now, the move will make Automattic the third company to own Tumblr in just 6 years. They're just shunting it higher up the billionaire scale. That's what they're doing. As predictable as night follows day in their world, and the Clinton death trail rolls on, allegedly. Even when people are in prison, it seems. Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced millionaire who's facing federal sex trafficking charges, of course, allegedly died by suicide last Saturday in his lower Manhattan prison cell. According to 3 law enforcement officials, Epstein hanged himself, and law enforcement sources said he was transported in cardiac arrest at 6:39 a.m. from Metropolitan Correction Center to New York Downtown Hospital. Now, according to sources, Epstein, 66, was set to stand trial next year for allegedly sexually abusing dozens, try hundreds, of minor girls in New York and Florida, and also the island. And his death came less than 3 weeks after he was found unresponsive in his cell at the federal prison in Lower Manhattan. There's a reason why I accent that. Apparently he had marks on his neck that appeared to be self-inflicted, and he had been on suicide watch since the July 23rd incident. One has to argue, or consider, or ponder, why was he in a New York prison to begin with? Given most of the perpetrators are from that very same place. Plus the fact that the NYPD is run by Citadel Weiss, which is like the enforcement arm of the Clinton Foundation. Don't think it's conflicting? Now, the BBC ran an article of conspiracy theories surrounding this, and then unleashed this gem this week, where it stated perhaps the most far-fetched conspiracy theories were pegged to the hashtag Clinton body count and are now hashtag Trump body count. Oh dear. Trying to the familiar of blaming others for what you're doing. It works all too well. And both of those trended on Twitter over the weekend. What didn't trend is, are these people fixing the country? Clearly not. They're more interested in doing hashtags. Now, the first was primarily used by the Conservatives to suggest that former first couple Bill and Hillary Clinton were linked to Epstein's death, according to the BBC. The latter, perhaps predictably it says, was used by liberals who speculated that Mr. Trump was somehow involved. Now, neither side as any evidence to work with. And according to the BBC, the baseless theory of the Clintons' involvement harks back to a long-running conspiracy that originated in the 1990s and claims that the couple secretly kill all their enemies. Conspiracy, oh my. And here's the classic. This was roundly and methodically debunked at the time by the fact-checking website Snopes. The fact-checking website Snopes. Oh dear. Snopes is a Langley fact-checker, period. And the BBC are citing that as proof. Oh dear. You know, Snopes was badly exposed last year as a fraud and who he was working for, and dropped out. And lo and behold, they replaced Snopes with another clown enterprise called Facebook Fact Checker. No doubt ran by the same Langley people. It's the same pattern over again, like what I explained in the Clowns in Panic show. They'll create technology and then they'll create companies outside of the parameter of Langley, but they're still running it. Same thing. Now, the Facebook fact checker, when you actually read their narrative of explanation of why they are calling this fake, if you actually read it, they actually prove it's true. And I started highlighting this in recent shows. Now, on the last three that they fact-checked on our site, the description was suddenly missing. It was just fake, that's it. They got rumbled, just like Snopes. And that's what happens when you read the details, not the headline. It's all there. But the BBC will have to come up with better script writers. As to me, they're getting as embarrassing as the Clinton News Network by the day. For those that don't know, the BBC is run by MI5, MI6, along with the Blue Dragon Group, whose leader is entity known as Hillary Clinton. And this is why they are pushing anti-Trump rhetoric on a daily basis on the BBC website. This was also covered in Clowns in Panic show. Cisco Systems has now cut 500 Silicon Valley jobs, according to documents filed with the state of California. The filing said 397 employees at the San Jose headquarters and 91 in Milpitas, California, were laid off, or going to be they were laid off on July the 31st. And the jobs cuts were mostly in engineering roles. I would expect you're going to see more of them. The Dow this week dropped more than 800 points in one day, while the S&P fell 2.7%, Nasdaq 2.9%, and the CBOE Volatility Index, which is Wall Street's fear gauge, jumped to a high of 22 yesterday. Bank stocks led the declines as it gets tougher for the group to make a profit lending money in such an environment. They are telling you they can no longer lend money, which is what this show's been telling you for a while. They can't lend no money since the credit lines they were using to keep themselves afloat were blocked due to negative liquidity. They cannot issue credit lines until they bring their banks into liquidity, which is not going to happen. And so lending has crawled to a halt. Predictably, Bank of America and Citigroup fell 4.7% and 5.2% respectively, while JP Morgan also dropped 3.6%. No surprise there with them three. Now the SPDR and S&P Regional Bank ETF is also down 2.9% and said that the US equity market is now on borrowed time after the yield curve inverts, according to a so-called expert from Bank of America, if there is any. So the equity market is collapsing. In other words, they've got no liquidity, which is, again, as I say, this sub-intel is indicative. Now, investors are increasingly worried about a global economic slowdown as weaker than expected data in China, which we have mentioned off the cuff recently, also deepened the gloom in the world's second largest economy. Data published yesterday showed that the growth of China's industrial output slowed to 4.8% in July from a year earlier, and is the weakest growth in 17 years. That's the second figure of China in a week, where it was the weakest in 30 years. I can't remember which piece it was. It was in last week. It was the worst data figures for 30 years. Also adding to the fears is Germany's, quote, negative GDP print. Yet again, they're telling you they've got nothing. Negative GDP. No liquidity. Which has raised the risk that Europe's largest economy is on the verge of falling into recession. Now, it's already in the recession. It's been in recession for the last 11 years. Don't let the clown and portal people, so-called experts, tell you any different. It's all an illusion. The Eurozone also, GDP, only grew by 0.02% on the last quarter, which is a significant slowdown from the 0.4% growth, less than 0.5% of growth. So today being the 15th of August, and although markets and all kinds of pointers towards an economic collapse indicate we were right to warn of it, some may say, well, you've got it wrong and it didn't collapse, despite the date range of the 15th to the 17th of August. But on the first day, personally, I'm hoping we're wrong in that projected date, which was known to us back in April. Now, the situation is still volatile, and all indications are both sides will not relent. One side is flexible, the one side being the Man of World Holland Trust, and one side isn't. From their perspective, they would sooner see everything collapse than the people get anything. That is who they are and how they think. Child-minded. If you don't play the game my way where I win, we're taking our ball away. Carry on. We can wait. You can't. Now, we will push on privately trying to provide solutions, but some won't budge, some won't act, and some are in fear and panic mode to do anything as it stands. Whether it comes on the 15th, 16th, 17th or the 31st or September, it will come. There's nothing left. The last paragraph told you that. Germany's negative GDP. That's the country, not a bank. And I hope all our members are prepared to get cash. it can happen within the hour. Because once it goes into a repeat of what happened in France, and suddenly it goes viral, and people start heading to the banks to get the money out. Good luck with that. And once they're shut, you remember the story about Venezuela. One guy went to Venezuela to report on it. He spent 8 hours at 3 banks to get some money out, and the total he got out for the whole day was $4.50. It's collapsing. We've known it for a long time, and I'm hoping there's a solution found, because it will create global chaos. For those of you listening to last Saturday's show, it lays it all out. What happens if that event takes place? It will get ugly. Badly ugly. So, we'll fight on. Right, we're going to have a music break, and we'll be back with a different bit of intel, shall we say, this week.